So it's voting day for the Indigenous Voice to Parliament, and the polling is not looking great. Shows a fairly significant but steadily downward trend. What's going on with this graph here? Oops. There we go, October. Hovering around 45%, I'd say. And looking at the trend line, which takes into account more than 60 polls, it's probably a fairly accurate picture. And the estimates are we need around 53% in order to secure the double majority. Needs to be closer to 53%. So why is the voice to Parliament going to fail when, again, we go back 1 year, we have support hovering around 65%. Not as much support as the gay marriage plebiscite, but still very high support all over the country. And as we've got closer to the date, fewer and fewer people in support. Why is this? I think the main reason is that we're all a bunch of racist convicts. No, not really, but there's got to be some reasons, and I think there's two main reasons. The first of which is primarily a failure to communicate by the Yes campaign. We've heard almost nothing about the consultation process that led up to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, how they went round to Indigenous communities and then congregated in Alice Springs. We've heard nothing about that, how this has come directly from Aboriginal people all over the country. They've failed to convince people that the lack of detail is something inherent in the referendum process rather than exclusive to the voice because there's some ulterior motive down the track once the referendum passes. They failed to convince people, especially me, of the real world improvements that a voice could deliver. They like something as simple as a few examples, maybe even drawing from some of the better things that other Indigenous bodies have achieved, like ATSIC. Just some examples. It's one thing to say this will deliver real world improvements in life expectancy, infant mortality, education, and failing to pass the voice will lead to reduced life expectancy and education rates, but no examples that show that to be the case. No detailed proposals. They've failed to differentiate this from other Indigenous bodies like ATSIC, which had a whole host of its own problems that we don't really have time to go into here, but some communication explaining how this would be different to the other Indigenous bodies that have received funding in the billions of dollars in the past would have been very helpful to the Yes campaign. And my personal bugbear, again, a failure of communication, is that the communication they have been engaged in has focused and almost entirely on, I guess, feel-good garbage that really has no place in the quest to alter a nation's foundation legal document. You may have seen the Voice TV ads with John Farnham's classic song. You may have seen Albo's tweets and interviews saying how nice we can feel, how good we can feel about ourselves by listening to Aboriginal people and giving them what they want. All about feels, nothing about reals. And in doing so, they've used division in communication to proclaim that there would be no division under a voice. There's been an excessive use of celebrity spokespeople like Ray Martin, who we looked at a couple of days ago, calling people voting no drongos and dinosaurs and dickheads, which is basically the other side of the coin of Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables comments in the 2016 US election, calling everybody who is not entirely on your side an idiot, a backward savage, does not bring anyone over to your side. You alienate a lot of people right in the middle, a lot of those undecideds. And that's the biggest failure of the communication by the Yes campaign, is the demonization of people who aren't firmly already in the Yes campaign. And you can say that the No campaign has pushed them to that with some of its more misleading or misdirected claims. But if you're the one seeking to change the Constitution, you have to be the better man, so to speak, and rise above that. And that is something I believe the Yes campaign has failed to do. And the second part of why I think the Yes campaign has failed is the effective use of the voice by the Albanese government, or by the Labor Party, as a political weapon. They've wrapped it up in their campaign platform in a manner that has almost immediately alienated a whole bunch of people who don't vote for the Labor Party. Remember, we're talking about a primary vote in the 30, 35, 36% here. So there's 65% of the country don't give their first preference votes to the Labor Party. So when you wrap up support for the voice in your partisan campaigning, you're alienating a lot of people right off the bat. Albo also rushed the voice in his first term. I think it would have been really easy to either legislate the voice, see how it goes, and then maybe put a referendum to the people in a second term of the Labor government, or build consensus, build support for it before you put the referendum out. It's happened fairly quickly. Not to mention that Albo himself has failed to read the Uluru Statement in full himself while telling everyone else to get out there and read it. And it would become so obvious why a yes vote is the right thing to do. And I think there's been a bit of overreach by Albo wrapping up the idea of Indigenous recognition in the Constitution, which has massive support throughout the country, in the 90s, 95%, by wrapping up an Indigenous voice with Indigenous recognition. You may have sunk both proposals. Just a little bit of overreach by the government. And of course, Labor's refusal to put specific set in stone details about the referendum or about the voice, which again, inherent to the constitutional process, but without or with a refusal to test the process by legislating it first, that lack of detail becomes fixed in people's minds and is an issue turning off many. It's going to leave, I believe it will leave some permanent divisions in the event of failure, to a point where we may not get Indigenous recognition or an Indigenous voice, when we could have done one at a time and potentially secured both. But anyway, we've got the Guardian newspaper here, which frequently reads like it's been written by a bunch of student unionists at Monash University, but they do some good work. Very left-wing. When I say a left-wing paper, I mean many of its prominent writers are very progressive, and I think that'll become obvious as we go through a few of their articles what the position of this newspaper is on the Indigenous voice. Love conquers all. Yes campaigners still hopeful for voice referendum despite poor polling. And I think that title is fairly emblematic of the problems we've just gone through with the Yes campaign. Love conquers all. It's all about the feels. You're telling us that the impact will be real, but your communication is focused entirely on the feels. Uluru Statement architect, Professor Megan Davis, has declared she still believes love conquers all, leading a chorus of yes campaigners to say they are remaining optimistic and not focusing on the polls on the eve of the Indigenous Voice referendum. I find that very hard to believe. That will be playing on their mind very heavily. 6 years after the statement was issued to the Australian people, Davis defended the integrity of the Uluru dialogue process that were the basis for the voice and have been heavily criticised by opponents during the campaign. Examples? I don't think anyone's criticised the consultation process that led to the Uluru statement. They've criticised the outcome, but I don't know of anyone that's criticised the process. She said its goal was to bring the country together, but agreed that a no vote should be the end of campaigning for a voice. You never think when you're doing this work, listening to old people growing up in missions under racial segregation, that 6 years down the track people will say you're a liar and a warmonger, Davis said. The dialogue's response was one of peace and love and bringing the country together. It was an extraordinary exercise, and to see those people belittled and demeaned has been extraordinary. Why are you giving the people belittling and demeaning the campaign that sort of airtime? Australians will vote on whether to alter the Constitution to enshrine the voice, a committee of Indigenous people to advise the government and Parliament on issues affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. The idea grew out of the Uluru dialogue process, set up by Davis and her co-chair, Pat Anderson, as a substantive form of constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians, a very substantive form of constitutional recognition. After symbolic recognition, such as a preamble, was not supported by the majority of Aboriginal people. The Uluru Statement from the Heart has come under immense scrutiny from no campaigners and critics over how many pages it consisted of and what participants said during the meetings that led to the statement. No campaign leader Warren Mundine made widely criticised claims that the Uluru Statement represented a symbolic declaration of war on Australia. Now, I'd need to look at the actual context of that quote and what question he was asked specifically, but that's a little bit retarded. An allegation Davis vehemently denied, saying the processes were led by Indigenous elders who raised their expectations growing up under assimilation and segregation policies. Under assimilation, are they not opposite policies? Maybe she grew up under both. She saw the transition. It's insulting. Anyone who grew up in Aboriginal communities or is Aboriginal understands the generosity of our old people and the way they look at the world. We hope Australia receives the Uluru Statement and the voice for what it is, an attempt by our people to push forward something politicians haven't been able to do. Recognition of our peoples, but also to bring the country together. I would say if those are your yardsticks, you are very close to failure. We believe Australians will accept the invitation. Love conquers all. There it is again. Polls indicate the referendum is on track for a significant defeat, but Davis echoed sentiments by Labor Senator Pat Dodson earlier this week, saying her team was not focusing on the surveys. Really? The Yes 23 director, Dean Parkin, conceded polls were against the voice, but said the campaign would continue trying to win over voters until ballot boxes closed at 6 p.m. today. We're on the ground and we will be every minute between now and when the polls close to get every single yes vote we possibly can, he said. Parkin suggested a yes vote would see Australia wake up to a new nation, a united Australia, and one that has done a profound good for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, adding it would be just the beginning of the very hard work of getting out there and making sure that the voice is established. A no vote gets us absolutely nowhere. Amongst all the words that have been spoken by the No campaign over this last year, there is not a single solution to be found amongst any of them. And that's something that I pointed out. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who has spent the past fortnight campaigning across the country, called on Australians to show kindness through a yes vote. Why is kindness part of the quest to alter the Constitution? It's ridiculous. Do better, Albo. Thinking of others costs nothing. This is a time where Australians have the opportunity to show the generosity of spirit that I see in the Australian character. In the event of a yes vote, attention would turn immediately to setting up the voice and putting it to work and choosing members. Davis joined fellow Yes campaigner Thomas Mayo in ruling herself out of seeking a position and said she would likely not work on developing the voice. That's for others to do. My expertise is in the Constitution. I've never been interested in politics or representation. My job will be done. Well, washing your hands of it. I'd never seek a position. The voice is for grassroots mob who live in their communities. They have their ear to the ground and know what's needed. And I wish that had been the focus of demonstration and communication by the Yes campaign. But if it was a no vote, Davis backed calls from Albanese to not seek a legislated voice. Well, it's too late then. You can't ask the people whether they want a voice or not. And then if the answer is no, go ahead and legislate it anyway. He'd potentially lose government after a single term. Would have been a better idea to legislate the voice first, give it a test run, then ask people to lock it into the Constitution. If that's the result, then like Noel Pearson, we've done our bit. There would not be much appetite for reform, she said. It's appropriate to rule it out. The country will have spoken. They wouldn't want a voice. But they may have wanted a voice if they'd seen it in action and seen it working. Again, I think this article demonstrates the biggest failure of the Yes campaign, and that is the focus on feels, particularly from Anthony Albanese, who, yes, he's a prominent Yes campaigner, but he's the Prime Minister of the country, should value the Constitution inherently as part of the process of Parliament. And all his comments are about thinking of others, generosity of spirit. Something real to grab onto, Albo. Let's look at a summation of the polls here, state by state. So obviously, Victoria and South Australia, two of the most progressive states in the nation. The ACT, if it was a state, would far and away be the most progressive state. But they're not. They're a territory and they don't count as part of this process. They get a vote, but they're not part of the majority of states equation. So even in Victoria, which has re-elected Daniel Andrews several times, the most progressive premier in the nation, we've had Liberal government in this state for 4 years out of the last 25. And for all the complaining about the Murdoch press, bloody putting its thumb on the scales, Sky News and the Herald Sun have failed to convince the people of Victoria thoroughly that Conservative government, more specifically than Liberal government, is the way to go. We kicked out some of the most progressive Liberals in the federal party and replaced them with Teal candidates because their party that they were a part of was too conservative. So for Victoria, What's the average there, do you reckon? I think we're probably at about 47 or 48%. If we look at these last few polls here, for Victoria to be polling at 46, 47% support is, well, for a start, it's very surprising. But it also means you can't blame everything on the No campaign actually achieving what it set out to do. At some point, the Yes campaign has to take responsibility for the failures, and they can't take responsibility for the failures inherent in the referendum process or for the question that was put out on the referendum itself, but they can absolutely take responsibility for the focus of their communication strategy. Being on feeling good about yourself, it's the right thing to do. Obviously, the lowest support, no surprise, is in conservative Queensland, home of One Nation, and where the Liberal and National parties merged to become one flesh. They got married. And look, their average is below 40%. We're looking at 37, 38% support here in Queensland. Not surprising, although I didn't think it would be that bad. WA might be the most surprising of all. Come on. Can we not just select these, buddy? Whatever. So WA. Very high percentage of Indigenous peoples, possibly the highest outside of the Northern Territory, which again, not a state, although I think that's I think that's wrong that the Northern Territory is not a state. They absolutely should be classed as a state. Why don't we have a referendum on that, making the NT a state of its own, so they don't have to live under the yoke of the failure of a federal government? See how they come back at elbow for this failure. But even WA, less support than Victoria and South Australia, with a much higher percentage of Indigenous peoples. That is surprising. And that's pretty sad, actually. That potentially means we have sizable percentages of the Indigenous population there that have failed to come around to the yes side of the voice. Tasmania, not enough people live there to really get any reliable data, but yeah, hovering around 50%. New South Wales, okay, closer to 40%, maybe slightly lower than Victoria. None of this is looking good for the Yes campaign. Undecided voters. Percentage of undecided voters and trend over time. Obviously, you would expect this to trend down as we've come closer to referendum day. Percentage of undecideds, we're sitting around 7%. That's about right. And unfortunately for the Voice, most of these undecideds have drifted to the no side. Let's have a read here. The average in polls that ask 2 questions before marking someone as undecided is actually around 7.5%. And in polls that ask only once, it's about 14%. In recent federal election polls that asked twice, undecided vote was down to around 6%. There are some people who will always say that they are undecided, even if you ask them on the day. A large share of voters were soft yes or no in early polls. Many would have been unfamiliar with the concept, and some details like the exact wording of the question were not revealed until later in the campaign. But the proportion of undecided voters has come down as the Voice has become more prominent and as people have seen ads and had conversations. No surprise there. So we know where the polls sit. We know what's likely to happen. Polls can be wrong. They could poll in specific areas or among specific demographics. So we don't know until the results are in. I wouldn't even particularly trust exit polling on a socially progressive issue like this. People are potentially not honest with pollsters. But now I think it's time we really ironed out the Guardian's position on The Voice by fact-checking some of their fact checks. Fact-checking the 7 biggest pieces of misinformation pushed by the no side. Interesting language. In a brutal campaign. That's not how I would describe it. The same debunked claims from the no camp have popped up time and time again. Guardian Australia takes a look. I wonder if they did the same for the yes campaign. Let's have a look at some of these. Full Story podcast. Amy Ramikis fact-checks misinformation about The Voice. Hundreds of organisations from health to educational, legal affairs, employment and business groups backing a yes vote. But corporations will always plaster a rainbow flag on their Twitter account. They'll do anything that's in their interest, and that doesn't mean anything to people on the ground. The No campaign has repeatedly raised the same debunked claims over and over again. Well, apparently the No campaign's just full of it, and the only rational position is yes. So, is that the case? Let's check it out. In just a few days, the Voice referendum will be held, and there will be an answer to the question the nation has been asked. Should there be an Indigenous voice to the Parliament enshrined in the Constitution? It has been, by any measure, a brutal campaign. But it's clear the No camp has relied in some measure on misinformation and fear of the unknown to sway voters to their side, with the same debunked claims popping up time and time again. The Black Sovereign No campaign, it should be noted, is separate to the main No camp and has not endorsed these arguments. The Progressive No case, as it is called, is based in concerns about sovereignty, taking part in a white person's process, the lack of power the Voice holds, and the desire to progress to truth-telling and treaty ahead of the Voice. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. So the Black Sovereign No campaign is totally separate to the rest of the No camp, not subject to the same levels of misinformation and debunked claims, and we're not going to analyse any of those no claims because they're kind of politically on our side and we don't really want to put their feet to the fire. We're just going to put the mainstream no campaigners to the fire. If you are just tuning into the referendum, here are 7 of the biggest bits of misinformation being pushed by some no campaigners. Australians will lose ownership of homes. Variations of this claim include Australians will be forced to pay reparations or the Voice will increase taxes, i.e. the Voice will cost you money. Of course the Voice costs money. Any bureaucratic department costs money. That's what a meaningless fucking statement. The Voice has no power to raise taxes. It is only an advisory body. Not even the Senate can raise taxes without the House of Reps' approval. The government is in charge of taxation, and there is nothing in the Voice that will alter that. There is no mention of reparations in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and the Prime Minister has taken the additional step of ruling them out. Obviously, it's a totally separate process. It's a totally separate question. And to be fair, I've been seeing a lot of ads about this on TV, on the net, on Twitter, a lot of celebrity endorsements. Not once have I heard or seen a claim from no campaigners that voting yes will lead to Australians losing their homes. What a fucking stupid thing to say. So this is an example of taking an idea that's right out on the fringe of the no camp. There might be a couple of people in rural northern Queensland that, are mates with Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson, and they think a Voice is going to lead an army of black policemen to come into their house and reclaim it in the name of an Indigenous nation. No mainstream campaigner or news source or opinion piece that I've read in any newspaper, including the Australian, the right-wing rag, has made anything like this claim. So the same repeated claims that have been debunked coming up over and over again, I think you are playing up this part of the No campaign to give your side a little more political relevance, political normalcy. And I'm sure the No side plays up some of the more extreme yes claims, like that the voice will definitely lead to treaty and truth-telling being a fairly Orwellian statement. But I don't think those claims are fair either. They're using claims out on the fringes to create straw men that they can then knock down as part of their yes or no campaigns. I don't think either of them's right, but I don't think either of them are prominent. And I think it's a waste of time to give them prominence like that and put any focus on them at all. But I guess if it's out there, you've got to debunk it. And the righteous student unionists at the Guardian will no doubt take up the mantle of debunking those extreme claims. As for the enduring claim of Indigenous people coming for your home and property, that is a fear campaign which has been spread for decades. In 1996, then opposition leader John Howard appeared on ABC's 7:30 with a map claiming 80% of Australia was under threat from native title claims because of the Mabo and Wick court decisions. Well, hasn't that been proven wrong? And if we have a look at this map, look how little of that brown area is anywhere near major population centres. So, yeah, guess you were wrong on that one, Johnny. The voice is legally risky. Variations of this claim include claims that the voice is a third chamber of parliament, Malcolm Turnbull's statement as soon as the voice was revealed to the public, who, by the way, is now one of the Yes campaigners' most prominent celebrity former politician spokesman. Constantly continues to prove all his critics in the Liberal Party right, that he was just a lefty in disguise. I thought that claim was ridiculous at the time, but with every tweet that he's made since getting pipped for a second time, he's desperate to prove his critics right. These furfies all rely on people not having an understanding of how Parliament, legislation and the High Court work. Voice cannot dictate laws to government. It does not have a veto power. It cannot submit legislation to the Parliament, override a parliamentary decision, vote on legislation, or hold up legislation. The Parliament remains in charge of its own destiny, meaning that the Parliament can choose to ignore any and all advice from the voice. The government lays out its legislative agenda, and the Parliament can agree to it, amend to it, vote it down, as well as delay bills to allow further consultation. Constitutional law experts are largely in agreement, really, that there is nothing in the Voice's addition to the Constitution which would lead to legal risk. The Solicitor General, who provides advice to the government on the potential legal risk of legislation or policy, has advised the inclusion would be sound. People can bring challenges to the High Court on any constitutional question, but it is the High Court that decides whether or not to hear these challenges. And that is true, but in itself, I think that can be a problem. We've seen the High Court reinterpret phrases like absolutely free to no longer mean absolutely free, to put little riders and asterisks and bloody terms and conditions on every single word in the Constitution, so there is no guarantee, or at least I haven't heard one, I would like to have, that the High Court won't have a significant impact here. There is nothing in the Voice to suggest it would open up the constitutional floodgates. The Voice will divide the nation. We talked about this one the other day. There is nothing in the Voice which would divide the nation. The Parliament receives advice from all sorts of bodies, lobby groups, advocates, think tanks, academics, inquiries, and interest groups. Most legislation goes through an open consultation process where anyone can submit their thoughts on a piece of policy direct to the committee examining it. None of this is new or unique. The only difference is that the Indigenous Advisory Body would be in the Constitution, so future governments could not abolish it, as they have every other advisory group from ATSIC onwards. And that is a problem. In trying to debunk this claim, you've raised one of the biggest bugbears of the No campaign. ATSIC was a miserable failure. It deserved to be abolished. I'm not saying they shouldn't have replaced it with something else. They absolutely should have. And if you go back and read some of the news stories at the time, you'll find that what people wanted it replaced with was something akin to the voice that's in the referendum today. But what good is an inability to abolish a failed organization and create a new structure, a new organization? That's a problem. That's not a good thing. That's not a reason to vote yes. That's a reason to vote no. The voice will force treaties. Truth-telling and treaty is a part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, but it is a completely separate process to the voice. Absolutely correct. It's effectively a slippery slope argument from the No campaign. Oh, if we get a voice, then we'll have a treaty. Then we're going to have truth-telling. It doesn't necessarily follow it would be a subsequent goal of a lot of the voice supporters, but those are separate political questions that deserve to have their own political discussions around them. Some states, including Queensland and Victoria, are progressing both truth-telling and treaty. Of course, Victoria's way ahead of the pack there. But again, that is separate to the voice. Leading No campaigner Warren Mundine has said that a no vote will lead to treaty, while fellow no advocate Jacinta Price has said a yes vote would lead to treaty. There is no evidence for either, as the federal government has not indicated it will be engaging in those processes no matter what the outcome of the vote is. Fair enough. The voice cannot force a treaty, which I don't think is anyone's claim. You're again dragging some of the fringe arguments back to the middle so you can debunk them. I don't think that's necessary here. Everything else in this statement has been absolutely true. It has no power over the Parliament. There are no details. Variations of this claim include you don't know what you're voting for, and the voice is a Trojan horse for secret agendas. Maybe Andrew Bolt has said something like that, but again, I don't think any of the mainstream No campaigners are making that claim. There is plenty of detail. None of it is set in stone. Oh my god. Oh, wow. There is plenty of detail, but none of it is detail. Because that is the Parliament's job. Absolutely true. But we have an in-principle guide of what the voice under this government, because legislation can always be changed, again true, would look like. We would have had a better guide of what the voice under this government would look like if they would have legislated it first before asking us to lock it in the Constitution. There's 8 design principles agreed by the government, including that voice membership would be chosen by Indigenous people in a way that suits local communities, would be representative of geography and gender. I didn't know that. Would have representatives from each state and territory, the Torres Strait Islands, remote areas, and mainland Torres Strait Islander population, and wouldn't run any programs or have veto power. Separately, there's also the Karma Langton co-design report, which the government hasn't officially endorsed, but has been regularly held up as an example. That report suggests 35 local voices representing different areas around the country. This is similar to what South Australia is already doing. Those local voices, which would include regional and rural communities, would also work with local, state and federal governments. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders would elect members of a national voice, which would have 24 members, 2 from each state and territory, 5 from remote communities, 2 from the Torres Strait, 1 representing Torres Strait Islanders living on the mainland. The National Voice would be gender balanced. Not sure how they would achieve that if the positions are elected. Those elected would serve 4-year terms, but can only serve 2 terms maximum. The 2 full-time co-chairs of the National Voice would be elected by the National Voice members themselves. So it does function very much like its own mini parliament, except it's not passing legislation or dictating policy. It's effectively a consultation device to be used by the parliament as input to policy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that in principle. The Voice would advise on policy that had a direct impact on Indigenous people, and defining that direct impact has again been a bit of a problem, because technically everything in Australia has a direct impact on Indigenous people. The Trojan horse and secret agenda conspiracies are partially based on secret documents that some no campaigners say the Yes Camp is trying to hide, despite those documents being freely available for years. Okay, where are you getting this secret agenda from, Guardian? Voice pamphlets, false claims and conspiracy theories distributed across Australia. One unauthorised pamphlet contains a link to website containing white supremacist material. What is an unauthorised pamphlet? Are you saying someone just printed off a bunch of shit on an A4 sheet, and you're calling that unauthorised campaign material? Receiving unauthorised pamphlets. Where? Give me a link to one of these unauthorised pamphlets. I want to see how much effort's been put into this. You're not going to give me the link to these unauthorised campaign materials. So, as far as I can tell, the Guardian's put out a call for campaign materials, and some random dickhead in his basement has printed off a bunch of shit and just sent it in, and they're calling that, oh, campaign materials, the no campaigners. How many of these were handed out? Where were they handed out? In what region? How many people received them? I wouldn't give much credence to that. That is, once again, taking something happening on the fringe and presenting it as the mainstream. That's pretty disingenuous. Look at this. This is a fucking Word document. This is a campaign material. And dare I say, I reckon if we could see down the bottom here, it would say authorised by. This is just something someone's printed on their lunch break. This is bullshit. Classic Guardian. The Trojan horse and secret agenda conspiracies are a couple of A4 sheets that some random person sent the Guardian with no detail on where they were distributed or how many were handed out. The Voice will allow the UN to take over Australia. Sadly, this is one of the claims that has taken over social media. I guess that's one of the benefits of not using Facebook anymore. I have not seen that claim anywhere. Despite having no basis in fact or reality, there is no way for the United Nations to take over Australia. Duh. The UN is a global forum where countries work towards peace and security. Hasn't that been going well in the Middle East? This particular conspiracy gained some steam during the pandemic and has lingered. Okay, so it's a hangover from the globalist 5G vaccine chips that they're going to implant in us so we all eat bugs and live in shoeboxes. Not much to see there. Going a long way to call that a claim worthy of debunking. The Australian Electoral Commission will tamper with your votes. This is another example of Trumpian-style politics seeping into Australia. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, attacked the AEC after the Commissioner, Tom Rogers, rightly explained that under the law, ballots with ticks on them could be considered a yes vote, but crosses would be informal. right, okay, that might be the case, but that clearly tilts the scales. That is the public service, that is the Australian Electoral Commission saying, even if you failed to write the word yes, we're going to consider these other things a yes vote, but we're not going to consider the no equivalent a yes vote. Neither of them should be counted as votes. They should all be considered informal, and yes, it's the word yes or no. But here we have the AEC publicly exclaiming, publicly, that ticks will be considered yes and crosses won't be counted. So it doesn't really matter what he said in the same breath. I wouldn't call that that's not tampering with votes under any circumstances, but it has echoes of activism in the commission that is responsible for keeping our elections not politically neutral, keeping them free and fair, I would say. And it's a bit of a stretch to call it Trumpian style as well, because Trump had the chance to present all his bullshit claims in court, and he didn't bring any of them. This is something that the AEC is stating publicly, so that's a bit of a false equivalence there from The Guardian. That has been the law for the last 6 referendums, which is interesting. So obviously there is no conspiracy or change, fair enough. Clive Palmer's legal attempts to have crosses counted in the last week failed because there is no issue for the courts to decide on. Okay. Well, the issue is that ticks count as yes, but crosses don't count as no. So I'm not sure what they're trying to say there. The No camp has, I love this phrase. Whenever you see this phrase in news articles, you can be sure that there is something that the claim is based on, but it doesn't count as third-party verified evidence. And that claim frequently appears in articles on both sides of politics. So whenever you see this claim, you can almost immediately discount it. The No camp has, without any evidence, claimed that the AEC could declare 5% of votes as invalid. Well, the statement is could declare 5% of votes. Do you need evidence for that? They could declare 100% of votes as invalid. The AEC said in the 99 referendum, only 0.86% of votes were classed as informal, and only a portion of those related to ticks and crosses on the ballot. There have also been reports of No campaigners telling people to bring a pen into the ballot box with them to stop AEC workers from changing their votes. There's nothing wrong with being sure. I wouldn't call that a conspiracy. There is no evidence of voter fraud in Australia. Well, that doesn't mean efforts to stamp it out are bad. To vote, you have to be able to provide your name and registered address. Voting more than once is illegal. This comes after the AEC publicly exclaimed how you could vote multiple times and have those votes counted, which was just unbelievable, honestly. Voter fraud, people voting more than once, is negligible and has never altered the margin. Possibly true, but citation needed. At the 2019 election, there are only 0.03% of instances of people voting more than once. And you'd have to be really keen. You'd have to be a rabid, barking mad activist on either side to buddy go round to polling booths. You're the bloody political equivalent of doctor shoppers looking for more painkillers. The vote count is scrutinised, meaning people from both camps watch the vote count as it happens, and the AEC's only job is upholding the law. It does not have skin in the game when it comes to the actual vote. Fair enough. Rogers said there was more tension around this vote, but a lot of the conspiracy theories remained the same. This thing about pens and pencils and a range of other conspiracy theories? Really? Conspiracy theory bingo at every election, you tick it off as it occurs. I can assure everyone that votes are treated with the utmost respect, but they don't have to take your word for that. We treat them like a democratic blank check. I don't think he knows what he's saying there. The cheque is definitely not blank. Ooh. A democratic cheque that we cash on behalf of all Australians, but not a fucking blank cheque. Oh, that's another miscommunication by the AEC. If anyone thinks we've got time to do this with something like 17 million electors, frankly, come work for us and you'll see what happens. It's just nonsense. Fair enough. Wow. So a lot of this stuff has actually appeared in discussion threads on Reddit. And a lot of it is definitely caricatures of the No campaign rather than serious attempts to get people to vote no. Building straw man caricatures of the other side and then knocking them down is it's not an atypical tactic that's been used by both sides of politics over the years, but I don't think you need to do this, and I don't think it's helpful to do that in important referendums like this. I mean, you're just using the fringes to paint no voters as backward savages. I mean, I've never, ever heard this losing ownership of homes claim using like Facebook posts and bloody fact checks to characterize an entire campaign. And some of them you've shot yourself in the foot, like plenty of detail, none of which is set in stone, which makes that detail not really that good for basing a decision on whether to change the Constitution on. So anyway, that's fact-checking the No campaign and fact-checking the fact-checking. Let's check out something else. friendlyjordies. Been subscribed to him for a long time. I've seen him in person in Melbourne. Hilarious motherfucker. I've loved his work for a long time, but more recently he's I don't know how to say it without claiming he's become a lot more partisan hacky. A lot more just being a cunt to people who disagree with you. A lot more, he even goes off with the Greens to promote Labor. So he's not strictly progressive. He's progressive, but firmly Labor progressive. Let's see what he has to say on The Voice.
Well, just in case you've been living under a rock, I'm guessing that rock is at Uluru, as we're having a referendum on, is the fifth element the thinking man's arrival?
Yes.
Yes or no? Put it in the comments now. That's this channel's referendum. In other more insignificant news, we're having a national referendum on whether or not to enshrine an elected body into the Constitution that acts as an advisory panel to the government on Indigenous matters, mostly because due to the tyranny of distance, it's hard to know which health and education programs are working fucking here.
That is a very good point. And that's where the benefits of a voice can be found. And that's what needed to be demonstrated to the people.
Unless you live there, and just with that piece of information, I think you can take an educated guess as to where the battle lines are going to be drawn on that. Pauline Hanson, I think we can put her down as a definite yes.
I don't like it.
Lydia Thorpe, definite no, and oh wait, she is voting no, what the fuck? Anyway, the majority of the population are in that World War I no man's land, ranging from indifferent to small yeses and small nos, but then you have the yes button. Those are the most insufferable influencers and celebrities in strong agreement with big yes.
That is a good point. I'm glad to know that he finds them as insufferable as everyone else. Insufferable to the point that they can actually do harm to their own cause. Particularly Ray Martin with his Hillary Clinton deplorable style comment calling them dickheads and dinosaurs. Just fuck off and let people vote, mate.
That's all the service industry giants that shotgun their logos with glitter during the plebiscite because they see ticking the yes box as some morality life hack. And as such, there's the usual.
All these racists saying if you don't know, vote no. It's like, how about if you don't know, you educate yourself? Literally.
Which, as any serious yes campaigner knows, that does nothing but drive people over to the no camp as they think, fuck these self-entitled
Oh, what a fucking politically astute young man this Geordie is. That is absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think that's been true for a very long time. I don't know how prominent yes celebrity activists can't see that. That is so obvious.
And they're not wrong, they are They're also wrong As let's have a look at who is voting no. The Black Sovereignty Movement. I don't think they're voting no because of their secret hatred of Aboriginals.
Good point. So you're saying no voters are aligned with the Black Sovereignty Movement, but as The Guardian so helpfully pointed out, the Black Sovereign campaign is separate to the main no camp and has not endorsed these arguments. The progressive no case, as it is called, is based on concerns about sovereignty, taking part in a white person's process, the lack of power of the voice, and the desire to progress to truth-telling treaty ahead of the voice. So they're the good no voters, Geordie. You should know that.
I think they're doing it because they think everything short of declaring Lydia Thorpe Queen Matriarch of Nam is appeasing the white man, which I sincerely wish them luck in, because if Lydia Thorpe is kicked out of strip clubs, can you imagine how many UN delegations she'd get ejected from? Yelling at Chinese ambassadors.
You know what I'm saying to you? Oh, penis. Oh, penis.
So anyway, that's the progressive no camp, and then you have big no, who are thinking big picture. I don't think these anti-globalist types are voting no because they hate Aboriginals, because to hate Aboriginals, you'd have to live on this planet, and they live on prison planet. They're voting no to protect us from a secret UN takeover, which, no, guys, don't you see? The whole point is to get Lydia Thorpe on the UN. You're ruining it. So there's a lot of people that are voting no, not because they're racists against Aboriginals. I did, however, come across this very informative pamphlet that explains that Aboriginals are merely pawns used by the Jews. So
Every aspect of the Aboriginal voice to Parliament is Jewish. You have got to be frickin' kidding me. If there had not been a Ron Castan, there would not have been a Mabo. Jeff Clark Atzik. Oh, Noel Pearson's the only one not Jewish. He doesn't get his own little Star of David? Oh, that's so racist. He was groomed by the Jews from the start. Where do you find this pamphlet? Sources: The Power Broker, Mark Liebler, An Australian Jewish Life by Michael Gwenda. What the fuck? Thank Christ this shit doesn't circulate in the mainstream. And thank Christ absolutely no one who's politically engaged enough to vote takes anything like this seriously. Aborigines didn't ask for the voice. He did, says Damien Freeman. He said to do it on a phone call at the Cape York Institute. Wow, conspiracy proven. Julian Leeser, current Shadow Attorney General. Co-chair of Joint Committee on Recognition, advisor on voice at Cape York Institute. What? So? Jesus, even for a conspiracy pamphlet, it's really lacking on juicy details. What a fucking wank.
Thank you for connecting the dots. Now, don't get me wrong, the majority of people voting no aren't doing so because they're insane, and there's absolutely insane yes voters. I mean, 3 seconds of TikTok is the most convincing no argument there is. But
True.
Here's my problem with insane yes voters. They're not funny. Their insanity comes from the thought that the world should be paying attention to them, not that the world is paying attention to them.
True.
The difference between the yes and the no camp is the yes camp are deploying the NUS and the no camp are deploying the NUTS.
The National Union of Students, who probably wrote a bunch of articles for The Guardian.
What's the point? It's a constitutional...
But you should know that Jordan is a big supporter of unions, so any union movement, even the National Union of Students, he would back without reserve. And I think there's something to be said for that, particularly in industries where workers have so little power because the corporations have grown so large, but unions are not virtuous by virtue of being a union. They are virtuous by the work they do, and public sector unions particularly are not virtuous. Neither would I argue is the National Union of Students.
Amendment. Referendums never get up, and I get why. It feels like if you had a full stop to the Constitution, the continent will split in half. Now that I think about it, why is WA voting no? Isn't
Potentially
that
true.
For the yes vote to win, it needs to have a national majority and win 4 states. The yes vote is very much the underdog and is falling right down in the polling. You pair that in with the fact that those are people answering in a poll, not in the privacy of a polling booth where... even the pen's judging me. Yeah, I can live with it. I know what you're doing. This is just like 2016 all over again when I learned that everyone is secretly a sexist. I was there. I remember.
Basket of deplorables.
Hang on, do Americans use pens or don't they have computers? It doesn't matter. Don't worry about that part. Anyway, what I'm saying is, all the no camp had to do was stick to small no talking points like it's divisive, I don't want a lobby group enshrined in the Constitution, I don't think it'll...
Which, from what I've seen, they largely have. And now let's watch Geordie bring some of the fringes into his argument and claim they represent the no campaign. That's my guess.
Do anything, you'd win in a landslide. Hell, if Peter Dutton just did one press conference where he shook his head, assuming it was well lit enough that people could actually see him shaking his head, you'd still romp it in. So why all of this? Why the Murdoch press of the coalition making dog whistles to a secret hidden agenda and
I knew Andrew Bolt was going to come into this, and I knew he'd have the most out there fucking position on it.
rigged vote? I'll tell you why. Because they know the banking elite is secretly using this referendum to take our country. So what can they say? Dutton's a mensch! But also it's because the Liberals and the Greens are using The Voice in the same way I am, as a subscription drive. Like and subscribe today.
Well, it's the first time I've seen him admit that. He absolutely does. But I guess good on him for admitting it. Noble about your deceit.
Well, that's not entirely fair on the Greens because they are barely campaigning on it at all, claiming the reason they're not campaigning is, Labor's making it hard for us to campaign. How are they making it hard for you to go door knocking? You've got hands. Even if you had 2 pirate hooks, they still make the sound, don't they? Keep in mind, they're crying about, we can't campaign. At the same time, they're bragging about pulling off a massively successful door-knocking blitz. And yet they're pretending...
Okay, now throw the line back. There's no time.
Hundreds of door knockers dispersed, conveniently aimed squarely at Labor's seat. So I think we all know what the Greens mean.
Ooh, Geordie's not going to be happy about that. Doesn't want anyone taking it to Labor. Why him and Kevin Rudd had a big circle jerk about inquiry into the Murdoch press because they publish shit that doesn't agree with my shit.
By Labor's hogging all the resources, and that is that the Greens aren't resourceful enough to think of a way of taking credit for The Voice. True. And you know what? Fine. If they didn't want to campaign on something regarding Indigenous affairs because it's not their bag, that would be totally fine. The problem is that's one of their central platforms, pretending to care about Indigenous affairs more than anyone else. Let me be clear. The Greens were the first party to support the Uluru Statement and still do. Let me be clear. The Voice is one of the core components of the Uluru Statement, yet apart from Sarah Hanson-Young, when do you hear any of them campaigning on it? It's either a couple of coy posts or an I support The Voice, followed by 7 minutes of shitting on The Voice. And you know why? It's as hilarious as it is scary. It's like the political party version of Tom Waits. I think it's because Adam Bandt's leadership is hanging on by a thread due to the Greens courting the nut vote.
Talk about conspiracies. I need to see some evidence for that, but he's probably right.
Same species of nut as One Nation, really. It's just one's grown in the sweltering heat of far north Queensland as opposed to the frozen plains of Victoria. And whether you're appealing to the absolute fringes of the black sovereigns or the sovereign citizens, how do you even begin to be honest about a constitutional amendment when you don't even think the Constitution is valid? In other words, the opportunists in the Greens who had the hubris to think that they could control the nuts are losing their grip. That's why Adam was slow to pull rank on the housing bill. It's why he can only tepidly support a yes vote. It's because the nuts have the numbers to pre-select one of their own. And if their own fractured sense of reality isn't perfectly validated, Adam will bust a nut. Now, normally my response to that would be, Lydia thought leaving the Greens was just the start. Adam Bant knows that he squirreled away a bunch of nuts that he's sitting on, and they're ready to crack at any moment. What's happening to the Greens should act as a warning to other parties. It's a lesson most Aussies learn at the beach. Don't feed the seagulls. Yet it seems from studies into the online activity of the No camp, they're feeding them like they're the Japanese tourists that can't read the writing on the wall.
Ooh, gosh.
I don't like comparing American politics to Australian politics. It's apple pies and mangoes, but they're both fruits. It's just we had far less fruits here until recently, but...
Yeah, but we got bananas.
Is how Mitt Romney woke up a few weeks ago wondering, what the fudge happened at my party? He didn't say fucking my act out because he's a Mormon and the key to theatre is to stay true to the character. But think about that. What did you think of when you used to think of a Republican? I bet you thought of the 80s guy from Futurama. That guy's a Democrat now.
Yeah, pretty much. The Republican Party has fallen a long way. Ben Shapiro might be the last aspect of sanity in that group of politically like-minded people in the US, because the 2020 election broke Donald Trump's brain.
Want to know what a Republican looks like now? Yeah! Maybe. I'm still not sure if he was just thinking, hey, this isn't the Buffaloes match. Don't get me wrong, a lot of Republicans are still lovely old ladies that seem to mistake the meetings for badge collecting societies. But the nuttiest of those in QAnon, the types that, were rioting in January 6. Why were they doing it? Fiction. Some choose your own adventure. They concocted in their heads that Nancy Pelosi's some high Luciferian priestess that bathes in baby blood, so obviously she has a lot to answer for. I mean, Republicans hate fetuses being killed, let alone babies. No choice but to storm the Capitol, which, huge accomplishment. I mean, even the Confederates couldn't do that. But think about what that means. Think about how fast politics is changing. Every other revolution in human history. No bread? Revolution. Oppressive taxes? Revolution. Dungeons and Dragons scenario I cooked up in my own mind? Revolution. I blame the internet. By the way, I'm perfectly aware of appearing on the internet in order to decry it, so...
Again, at least he's aware of his role in this.
I don't bother pointing that out. On YouTube, no less, but... I think we all know the internet is making us go a little crazy. The same tool that gave us the opportunity to circumnavigate the mainstream press, which I'm eternally grateful for, it's also given us the ability to crawl into whatever little fan fiction rabbit hole we please, emerge around voting time as Gary the pedophile vampire slayer, marching on the streets for a no vote, but even a little suspicious about that is they're clearly leaving one letter out. Do your own research. Thanks to the net, this is a large swath of the population now, and it's only getting bigger, so someone is going to court their vote. And in America, it started with little dog whistles. We are the storm here. I'm a digital soldier there. Now QAnon is a quarter of Republicans.
Citation needed. A quarter of Republicans believe central views of QAnon conspiracy movement. Pew Research. Most Americans who have heard of QAnon conspiracy theories say they are bad for the country, and that Trump seems to support people who promote them. That's just heard about them. Most US adults think it's a bad thing. So you've got 20% either somewhat good or very good. Yeah, maybe that could equal up to a quarter of Republican voters. Sizable minority. Democrats are more aware of these conspiracy theories than Republicans. Only about a quarter of Republicans feel it is very bad. Another 24% say somewhat bad. Roughly 4 in 10 Republicans who have heard of it say it is a good thing. Fuck, maybe he's right. That's wild.
A quarter. You have those kind of numbers, you're no longer voters, that's your base. So just like what's happening to the Greens here, too many nuts, the tail starts wagging the dog, the nuts start winning primaries, then elections. Before you know it, you have a...
That's true, it's happened in the Democratic Party over there as well. And it's happening to the Liberal Party over here because the Teals took most of the progressive Liberal Party seats, which means the party has tilted significantly more conservative.
Elected representatives openly saying no longer a dog whistle, just megaphone. There's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take this global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles out.
Free Taylor Greene. Wow, what a statement.
Which, because she says it so confidently, even I start thinking, oh my god, what if she's right? People will say, what's the difference? Misinformation isn't new to politics. What about there will be no cuts to health, no cuts to education? Or...
What about there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead? And then implementing a carbon tax as part of your transition to a carbon trading scheme. Why not just go straight to the fucking trading scheme instead of breaking an explicit promise? Every politician does this, Geordie. You know that, but you'll never say it.
Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Here's the difference. We could all at least agree that Iraq exists. We had that. True. Imagine a party trying to govern a country where a bunch of their MPs don't even think Australia is a country. It's a corporation. Imagine a future where there was a PM that was trying to keep a governing party like that happy. I would like to say that I'm happy to be elected Prime Minister of this great corporation, or should I say country, just to keep the sheeple up to speed, but... so many elections have been stolen at this point, I'm not even sure about the legitimacy of this one. I'm going to have to audit it. I mean, did I steal it? When will the PSYOPs end? Anyway, back to the topic of this video. If you think that's all far-fetched, there is a lot of interesting reading about the misinformation coming out of the No campaign. It's like nothing.
The No campaign, the official No campaign, isn't putting out most of that weird shit. Fringe individuals are not the No campaign. That's misinformation, Geordie.
We've ever seen. But I think even misinformation is a bit of a euphemism. What is coming out of loud no is pure fantasy. Now again, not everything that is coming out of the No campaign is. There is a very reasonable small No campaign
but only a very small part
currently running. But it's like No gets that reality has fractured, that we're having two different referendums at once. There's one for us normies, the small yeses and nos.
Us normies, the good guys.
Looking at the ballot and saying, do you want to...
I wish it was ticking a box, but we got to write yes or no. So that's misinformation.
Establish an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, while this woman with her they live sunglasses sees the real question on the ballot paper, which is, do you like Bill Gates? No! But why are the No campaign, and by extension the Liberals, courting these colourful characters? I think it's because the Liberals know they're not getting the teal seats back. That personal yacht has sailed.
And that is a huge problem for the future of the Liberal Party in this country, and for the future of the right wing in Australia to be able to govern, because without progressive liberals, or as I like to call them, small L liberals, actual liberals, not conservatives using the word liberal, you're never going to get government again. And most of those seats were lost in Victoria. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for the Liberals. And with Peter Dutton in charge, there's no way those seats are coming back. The Liberal Party lost some of its best members, like Tim Wilson. What a legend. He got pipped by a teal. And so the party that remains is just more conservative, less appealing to a liberal / progressive state like Victoria.
So they need someone to replace the hoity-toity Malcolm Turnbull types, or...
Malcolm Turnbull, who was immediately against The Voice, but is now publishing Guardian articles on his Twitter feed.
Wits. if you will. Fuck, I never thought about why they're called wits. They're basically platypuses. Half the time on water, half the time on land. My wife lays eggs. Why would the Liberals even want those highly educated seats back? It's far better to have a base that do their own research and therefore don't demand action on
He might be right about that.
silly little things like climate change and anti-corruption bodies. Hard to keep Abigail and the mining lobby happy. Far easier to please Michelle. She only demands action on the real issues, secret pedophile cults and the Bilderberg group. And so, like the Republicans in America, you bring them in with a little wink to ritual abuse here, a nod to ending bad globalism there. Words are cheap. Ending $80 million government payments to your mates' companies. You can say a lot about it, but it ain't cheap. Just remember,
Neither was Mikey or the Westgate Tunnel or any other of Labor's major projects. No government project is cheap or efficient. It's a government project.
though, the Republicans going from this to this took about 3 election cycles. Scott Morrison saying those little dog whistles was only 1 cycle ago. You can watch my video about it. We're halfway through this one and you already have prominent coalition.
Yeah, but he also said the 1975 constitutional crisis was a CIA coup, so I'll take your opinions with a grain of salt, Jordan.
MPs like Bridget McKenzie's team actively helping the Nutters campaign, and they're not even embarrassed when they're caught. It's remarkable. The net is fundamentally altering the fault line of politics. Ever since ancient Rome, every election ever came down to the age-old divide of capital versus labour, the haves versus the have-nots.
Capital versus Labour. What a Marxian prism through which to view the political reality in Australia. But he also subscribes to the propaganda view of communication, so,
And it'll be the same versus...
we don't have any agency as individual actors. We're all just subjects of the systems in which we live, isn't that right? That's why we need to join unions.
the insane. What it's looking like is soon we'll have a workers' party that represents everyone from nurses to neurosurgeons, and a coalition that'll turn into the coalition of cults, instead of the moderates and the WA faction.
Well, if we still had the Teals in seats for the Liberal Party, that might be less likely to happen. But I'm sad to say he's pretty right about this. But he's also on the front line of campaigning to get moderate Liberals out and replace them with Labor and Greens and Teals. So, I don't know, reap what you sow.
There'll be the Van Helsings pushing for a freeze on Dracula's blood bank accounts, and the Truthers demanding the government stop flooding by stopping its secret weather machine.
So, you're going to vote yes or no?
Fuck Bill Gates!
Fuck Bill Gates. What a note to end on. So that's Jordan Shank's position on The Voice. More likely to vote yes than no, I would say. Now we've got Bearing, another Aussie internet shitlord / edgelord. Used to live in my neck of the woods in Victoria before fleeing for sunnier pastures. He's talked about my violent, unprovoked assault back in the Melbourne crime wave. He's mentioned a couple of my videos. He's a hilarious motherfucker, but largely stays out of party politics and focuses on cultural issues. So let's see what he's got to say on the Voice to Parliament.
This
Lovely
weekend,
drone
Australia
footage.
votes in a referendum on the Indigenous Voice to Parliament. This is what we're voting on. A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Now, I don't have a problem with the Constitution recognising the Indigenous people of Australia, but I do have a problem with the voice part. And as with anything involving race and politics, the loonies have come out to show their true colours.
Don't you dare
Get out of the way. You just grabbed my phone and assaulted
Whoa!
me. Right, that's
Gross.
what's your name? What's this crazy bitch's name? Just
Oh, that's
straight
not the
on.
move, mate.
What is this crazy bitch's name?
Wow, that's full on. I'm sure there are scenes on the flip side of that coin you could dig up on Twitter or TikTok, but that scene right there is a little reminiscent of the F the Jews chant at Sydney Opera House the other day. That's a little bit wild. I don't know who this guy is, but...
No.
What a chant.
Now, I could go into key figures behind the push for The Voice, like the writer of The Voice Handbook and literal communist Thomas Mayo. This lovely fella.
The power in The Voice is that it creates the ability for First Nations to go forth with coherent positions on what legislation needs to be created, what legislation needs to be amended, and punish politicians that ignore our advice.
When he says punish politicians that ignore our advice, I don't think he's talking literally. He's talking about a political cost to ignoring advice that has been presented by The Voice to the government on issues affecting Indigenous peoples. And I think that's fair. I think that's largely the point of The Voice. If you have a voice and you have proposals that have come directly from these Indigenous communities being presented to politicians and the government of the day, and they say, thanks for the report, and chuck it on their desk and never pick it up again, the whole exercise is moot. There's got to be some repercussions, and I think that's what he means when he says punishing politicians. So I don't think that's as bad as Bering's implying it is here.
And also to pay respects to the elders of the Communist Party, who I think,
Need to watch that video in full, because I don't think the Communist Party has much to do with the voice to Parliament.
without a doubt, have played a very important role in our activism.
Oh shit, maybe I'm wrong.
I'm going to stick to what I know. Now, there's a few reasons I'll be voting no in this weekend's referendum. The unknown. The Voice would be a committee of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have a direct advisory role over the Parliament and executive government. As we've covered, the question being put to Australians is a simple one. A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. And like I said, I'm happy to recognise the First Peoples of Australia in the Constitution, but what does an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice actually mean? Well, the actual text to be inserted into the Constitution under Section 129 subsection 2 reads, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and executive government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, what does relating to mean?
And as we've talked about, that is one of the big questions that the Yes campaign has not answered, neither has the government. Because technically, I bet this is what he's about to say, every issue in Australian Parliament affects Indigenous Australians.
You could argue that all matters in Australia relate to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people because they are the first peoples of Australia. This would be open to interpretation by the High Court. In any case, I'm not comfortable with altering the Constitution to give certain citizens more access and more input to the workings of the government, especially when it's based on race. The fact is, the Parliament could legislate an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice Advisory Committee without constitutionally dividing Australians.
It's like he's been keeping tabs on my videos. That's exactly what I said, that they well, he hasn't said they should have, but they definitely could have legislated it beforehand, before asking us to, once again, lock it into the Constitution. That was an option they had, and they forewent.
By race. If it's effective, great. If it's not, they could legislate it right back out. Representation. Australia is a representative democracy. I mean, we're part of the British Commonwealth, but effectively we're a representative democracy. We elect representatives to vote on our behalf in Parliament. That's how we get our voices heard by the government. Now, the Yes campaign will preach about the need for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices to finally be heard by the government.
In 2022, we still don't have a framework where Indigenous people are represented into our legal, legislative and constitutional processes.
But
they could have been legislated into the Constitution. But they are. They are as Australian citizens, which they have been for decades. So I don't think that argument's technically correct. And they could have been recognised in the Constitution separately to the endeavours for the voice, but as we read in The Guardian, they declined that option. They wanted something with more real-world impact, something that they'd been asking for a number of years, something that had always been an aspiration for them. And that's fair enough. You can't begrudge Aboriginal people for wanting something more than a couple of words in the preamble. That doesn't mean it's not overreach, though.
The fact is they're slightly overrepresented in Parliament, with 4.8% of federal parliamentarians being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders.
4.8% Indigenous MPs, 3.2% population. That's an interesting stat. Let's break it down by state. 24% Indigenous MPs in the Northern Territory, 24.5%, pretty close. 2.1% Indigenous MPs in WA, where 3.2% population are. Oh, so Queensland has more Indigenous people than WA. That's interesting. No Indigenous MPs in Tasmania, or any student activist Indigenous MPs in ACT, where many reside. The education rate in Indigenous people is very high in the ACT. I'm amazed none of them are in Parliament.
While making up 3.2% of Australia's population, why do they need a permanent constitutional advantage when it comes to influencing the workings of our government? The Uluru Statement. The Voice to Parliament is a proposal put forward in the 2017 Uluru Statement. Now, the Yes campaign will have us believe that the Uluru Statement is a fairly fluffy one-page document, calling for the Voice to Parliament and what they call the Makarrata Commission.
Yes, the actual statement is a single page, and yes, the documents that make up the Uluru Statement from the Heart are several more pages. What an irrelevant part of the argument, though. It has nothing to do with what's going to happen on the ground as a result of the Voice. And I don't know why Yes and No campaigners are focusing on how many fucking pages the Voice, the Statement from the Heart, rather, is. It's so pointless.
To supervise the process of agreement making between First Nations people and the government.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart that's constantly referenced to justify the creation of an Indigenous voice to the Parliament is normally thought to be just one page. At least that's what most Australians think it is.
Who cares?
In part because that's what the Prime Minister has repeatedly told them.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart, I'd encourage people to read. It'll take you about 2 minutes. You can fit it on one A4 page.
But when Sky News presenter Peter
Talk about putting your foot in your mouth, Albo.
Fredlin put in a Freedom of Information request for a full copy of the Uluru Statement, she received a 112-page PDF, which included 2 documents, the Uluru Statement, which made up 26 pages, and meeting notes, which made up the remaining 86 pages. So the Uluru Statement is in fact 26 pages long and includes the text, treaty could include a proper say in decision-making, the establishment of a truth commission, reparations, a financial settlement such as seeking a percentage of GDP, the resolution of land, water and resources issues, recognition of authority and customary law, and guarantees for the respective rights for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, Australia's Prime Minister has said on multiple occasions that he wants to implement the Uluru Statement in full.
Today, I reaffirm my government's solemn promise to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
Elbow. I think his heart's in the right place there. What a surprise, given his constant prattling about feelings. But I think what he's talking about is the one-page statement, not the underlying documents that talk about the treaties and truth-telling stuff, whatever is involved in that. But he's saying, I'm going to implement the whole lot, and I think he just stuffed up, to be honest. I think he's talking, honestly, about the single-page statement.
And on behalf of the Australian Labor government that I am proud to lead, I recommit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
Oh, and he's also said he hasn't read the full Uluru Statement.
They know the Uluru Statement from the Heart is one page.
Classic Albo.
Not hundreds of pages.
But what are the other 25 pages? I've read them. What are they?
What they are is a record of meetings. Some of them, they're records of the big lead-up that happened.
Do you agree with most of what is said in those 25?
They're records of the consultation process that occurred over, 18 months before the statement from the heart was released. You gotta read your briefing notes, Albo. Come on.
5 pages?
I haven't read it.
You haven't?
Oh, snap. Fucking Neil Mitchell's read it and Albo hasn't.
Read it.
There's 120 pages. Why would I?
Oh! Why would I? Oh, man. That's just a classic communication failure from the Prime Minister of Australia there, Anthony Albanese. Why would I? Maybe because it's important to know about what went on before the statement from the heart came out. Maybe it's important to know how the statement from the heart came into be. Maybe it's important to know why Aboriginal people want a voice as part of the constitutional recognition package rather than a few words in the preamble. There's a lot of reasons to read the whole document, especially if you're running the country.
I know what the conclusion is.
I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. Some Australian cringe-lord YouTuber can read the full document, but the Prime Minister of Australia, who's looking to change the Constitution based on proposals in this document, can't.
Preach. Good call, Baring.
Division. As I've already mentioned, a yes result in this referendum will constitutionally divide Australians by race. Now, I understand Indigenous Australians have their problems. There's issues surrounding poverty, health, education and more. But the idea is to fix these problems, and we're already pouring massive amounts of money into doing just that. So let's have a closer look at how that money can be better spent to fix these problems.
That's something the Yes campaign should have done, and they should have explained how a voice to Parliament will take over other roles. More efficiently spend money in these communities, get the resources to where they're needed most. And they failed to do that.
If part of the solution is to form a special Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander committee to advise the government on how to achieve this,
a la ATSIC, which failed, how will the voice be different to ATSIC?
Then great. But we don't need a permanent solution to what's supposed to be a temporary problem, especially when it creates a
permanent solution to what is supposed to be a temporary problem. That's an interesting point.
Two-tier system of citizenship, giving one group of Australians additional influence over the government. Aren't all Australians supposed to be equal? What are your thoughts? I'll leave you with legendary TV presenter Ray Martin calling you a dickhead and a dinosaur for exercising your democratic right to vote.
There's nothing hidden in the words of the referendum. No ulterior motives, no conspiracy. Nothing that has to be explained. If you don't know, vote no. What a stupid, nonsensical slogan that is. If you don't know, find out what you don't know.
As we've said. In fact, not as I've said. As The Guardian said, there is plenty of detail, just none of it's set in stone. Let's wrap this up.
What that asinine slogan is saying is if you're a dinosaur, a dickhead, who
well
can't
done,
be
Ray.
bothered reading, then vote no.
If you can't be bothered reading, well, Ray, when you can tell me how this thing's going to work in practice, when you can tell me some of those details that are not set in stone, I'll agree with you. But until then, I think you've got your work cut out for you. And you're going to lose if you take Hillary Clinton's path of calling everyone who doesn't agree with you a dinosaur and a dickhead and a deplorable. That is the fastest way to turn people off. And that's not news. I think we've known that since at least 2016 and well before then, in my humble opinion. So polls are open for another few hours. Get out there before they close and consider your vote carefully. Remember not to put a cross on your ballot, but you can put a tick if you're looking to vote yes for some reason. But even the most uninformed, politically disengaged voters should be able to write a yes or a no, and remember that whatever your decision is, you don't have to feel bad about it. And you shouldn't feel fucking good about it because you're being nice. And you certainly don't have the right to make others feel good or bad about their reasons for voting yes or no. There's good reasons for and against, and whatever happens, we all still have to live together at the end of the day. So I'll leave it there. Cheers, guys.